All right, let's journey back in time. We're talking 7th century Arabia. Now, this was a world of, fierce pride, incredible poetry, but also some really deep-seated traditions. What we're going to do is explore this complex society and the very family that the Prophet Muhammad was born into. It's all about setting the scene for what comes next, one of the most pivotal moments in all of history.
Okay, so here's the plan. First, we'll look at the land itself, how this isolated place really shaped its people. Then we'll get into the culture, all that pride and poetry and, well, warfare. After that, we'll dive into the religion, a whole pantheon of idols. And we'll finish by zooming right in on the Prophet's grandfather and a promise that, wow, it almost changed everything.
All right, first things first, the land. You really can't understand the people without understanding the place they came from. Arabia was this harsh, rocky desert. And that geography, it was absolutely crucial. It shaped a totally unique culture and, believe it or not, a really, really pure language.
And this had some huge consequences. Because Arabia was mostly just rocky mountains and empty desert, the big empires of the day, the Romans, the Persians, they just looked at it and said, nah, not interested. Why bother conquering it? So this isolation meant very few outsiders ever came and settled there, which led to this really unique cultural bubble.
And one of the biggest effects of that bubble was the language. It stayed incredibly pure, right? No foreign influence watering it down. This created this immense cultural pride. The Arabs basically saw the world as having two kinds of people. There was us, the Arabs, who spoke this perfect, eloquent language, and then there was everybody else. They called them Ajami, which literally means one who can't speak, or, well, dumb.
So how did all that pride actually play out in their society? Well, it created a culture of incredible extremes. We're talking a society that could produce the most breathtaking poetry you've ever heard, while at the same time getting caught up in brutal, endless wars.
And you can see that paradox right here. The Arab society celebrated these amazing virtues. Generosity was everything. A host might slaughter his very last camel just for a guest, and your word, it was a sacred honor. But then, right alongside that, you had this rampant ego, these vicious customs, and this cycle of fighting that just seemed impossible to break.
And the scale of the fighting, it's just staggering. We're talking about somewhere between 100 and 125 major battles. And these weren't just little skirmishes. These were huge, multi-generational wars between tribes that went on for centuries.
This quote, it just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? These feuds were literally inherited. Your grandfather started a fight, your father continued it, and now you're fighting in it, and half the time, no one even remembered what started it all. The hatred itself just became the reason to keep fighting.
And it wasn't just the wars. Society was dealing with some other really deep-seated problems. You had these predatory tribes they called the Wolves of Arabia who would just rob and kill travelers. Superstition was everywhere, dictating people's entire lives. Priests would claim they could see the future. And, just tragically, some tribes had this custom of burying their newborn daughters alive.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about the spiritual heart of Arabia, the Kaaba in Mecca. It was originally built as a center for monotheism, but by this time it had been completely transformed. It was now the epicenter for a huge, complex system of idol worship.
And get this, inside the Kaaba alone stood a staggering 360 different idols. Each one represented a different god, for a different tribe or a different purpose. It was a total departure from the whole reason the Kaaba was built in the first place by Abraham and Ishmael, as a house for the one God.
And what's crazy is that tradition actually pinpoints exactly how this all started. It's traced back to one guy, an influential chief named Amr ibn Luhi, about 400 years before the Prophet. He took a trip to Syria, which was heavily influenced by the Romans, and he was just so impressed by their idols that he brought the whole practice and the first major idol, Hubal, back with him to Mecca. And these idols, they came in all shapes and sizes. They weren't just ideas, they were actual physical statues. Different tribes worshiped different ones. Yaguth was a lion, Nasr was a vulture, and Hubal, the main idol in Mecca, was this big statue of a man carved from red agate with one hand made of solid gold.
So, from this big, wide picture of society, we're now going to zoom way in. We're going to focus on one family and one really extraordinary man, Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's grandfather. His life was just marked by these pivotal moments that would end up shaping the destiny of his whole family and really all of Mecca.
So for centuries, the sacred well of Zamzam, the well of Ishmael, had been totally lost. No one knew where it was. Then, its rediscovery begins with a series of dreams. For 3 nights, this figure tells Abdul Muttalib to dig, but gives him these weird cryptic names. Then on the 4th night, the dream finally says the name, Zamzam, and it gives him the exact location. So he and his only son start digging. And of course, the main tribe of Mecca, the Quraysh, are all laughing at him. But then, to everyone's shock, they find it.
But this incredible discovery, well, it came with a price. The leaders of the Quraysh immediately started arguing with him over who the well belonged to. This led Abdul Muttalib to make this really solemn vow, a promise that would bring his family to a dramatic and, frankly, terrifying crossroads.
So as the Quraysh were arguing that the well belonged to all of them, Abdul Muttalib felt totally alone. He only had one son to stand with him. He felt powerless. So he makes this desperate plea to God. And with that plea came a very, very dangerous promise.
And that was the vow. See, in their culture, a promise like that, made to God, was absolutely unbreakable. Years went by, he eventually has 10 sons, and the well is secure. But now, the time had come to fulfill that terrible promise.
He gathers all 10 of his sons and explains the vow he made. A draw is held. They cast lots with each of their names, and the lot fell on Abdullah, his youngest son, his most beloved son, the man who was destined to become the father of the Prophet Muhammad.
So a completely heartbroken Abdul Muttalib gets ready to go through with it. But the elders of Quraysh step in. They're horrified. They argue it would set a terrible precedent. So a diviner comes up with the solution. They'll draw lots between Abdullah and 10 camels. If the camels are chosen, they're sacrificed. If Abdullah is chosen, they add 10 more camels and draw again. They draw Abdullah. They add 10 more. Abdullah, again. This happens 9 times. Every single time the lot falls on his son. Finally, with 100 camels on the line, the lot falls on the animals. Abdullah's life was spared, and from then on, 100 camels became the price of a man's life.
And this famous statement from the Prophet himself, it just connects everything so beautifully. He's talking about his own lineage, directly tied to 2 near sacrifices, his ancestor Ishmael, who Abraham was commanded to sacrifice, and of course his own father, Abdullah, ransomed by 100 camels. That single sentence just carries generations of history, of faith and destiny. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? The sheer weight of everything that had to happen right before he was even born.